Hi, welcome to Changing the Narrative. I'm Henry Turner.
And I'm Kathy Lopes.
This is our project to help leaders learn how to create a culture with an anti racist mindset.
In each episode, we'll answer one question to help leaders make an impact in their classroom, school, organization, or really anywhere they lead.
So, Kathy, the first question is, how do you support staff and students after a racial crisis?
So I think this is a really important question, specifically in the last year, with schools having to figure out how to respond after national crises that we've seen. And we get a lot of questions about how do I talk about this with students. I think one of the most important things that when I'm talking to educators is to really help them understand you don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to be an expert in this, and none of us are. And that to really just start with acknowledging what happened and feeling the room and trying to get your students to share, to ask them how they're feeling, what might be helpful. So for me, it's less about knowing exactly what to say, but just acknowledging that one, this happened, and try to figure out what does your room need, and how do you invite students to say this might be helpful. For some students, it might be I don't want to talk about it, and that might be okay too. But I think it's also thinking about options. If they do want to talk about it, maybe not in your space, that you have some suggestions, resources, other trusted adults in the building that you can connect them to. So I'd want to start there.
Yeah, the place that I would start is just making sure the adults are taken care of first because they're dealing with their own stuff
Yep.
and their own nervousness about how to address it. And so I think similar to the crises that we've had over the last year is having a emergency faculty meeting just to sort of let them process their own stuff and give them the power to say that it's okay to not talk about it with students, but they have to tell students. And I think that's like a critical thing that I heard from your comment is that our students want to hear that we're upset by it.
Right.
And when they don't, they think we're ignoring it.
Right.
And so they want to make, so it's okay to say, I'm just upset and I'm not ready to talk about it.
Yeah, I think absolutely, like validating it, because out of fear, and then maybe avoiding it subconsciously sends a message that I don't care. I don't feel the same way, when in reality, teachers very well may. But not verbalizing that, or even just saying, I'm not sure to talk about this because I'm upset, is just a way to just validate that you have emotions connected to it. And I think that just creates a space where students are like, okay, I'm not the only one who's struggling with this.
Yeah, and I think with the racial crisis, sometimes people are extra nervous to talk about it because it has to do with race. I mean, that's what makes this a tough topic for people. And so um, you, but students need to know, particularly students of color, need to know that anger. And so we've had some racist incidents in the past where our students said, "Well, you addressed it, but we don't know think you care."
Right.
And what they were really saying was that you didn't express anger, right? And that's something that we were trying to be professional and like just saying we're going to, check off the boxes to address this. But really, the students need to know, yeah, we're really upset about this, and that we're going to find out what happened and we're going to resolve it. And then we can carry out the same things we would do, but they need to know that we're upset by it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's sometimes this feeling like, oh, we have to be the adults. We have to be, not emotional, because that's the only way that we think that we can hold this space and not allow it to get out of control. And then I think, like you said, it does the opposite. It sends this message that you don't actually care. And I think in just thinking about how to set up the space for this conversation, one of the things that's really important is to consider ground rules, because you're not necessarily certain how every student is going to respond or how they feel. So inviting the class to say, well, for us to have this conversation, there are a couple important things that we need to agree on. And starting with some simple things like we're going to, respect each other. We're not going to talk over each other. We're not going to interrupt each other. We're going to use I statements, and even have some of the students say anything else that you feel like you would need to feel safe in this conversation. And then get agreement for everyone. Okay, does everyone agree that we're going to really go with these agreements and these norms and these ground rules for this conversation? And get that buy-in, and then also hold students accountable if someone doesn't, if someone veers off. that agreement too, because I think that's really important too for students to say, well, we spent all this time creating these ground rules and you just allowed the student to interrupt me or say harmful things. So making sure we interrupt and hold students accountable and say, well, that's not what we agreed on. Do you want to participate or do we have to remove you from the conversation, which can be a little hard, but I think that's also really, really important in creating that safe space for the conversation.
Definitely. And I think not overthinking your planning, right?
Right.
So having these ground rules, and it's okay to just listen to students.
Mhm.
Um, and the thing that I've really expressed with staff is that there shouldn't be a debate. When
Right.
there's an offense that's happened, there's a racist event that happens, there shouldn't be a debate about whether it was racist or not, or whether, like, the
Right.
emotions are too intense at that moment, that it's okay to hear students and how they're feeling, and we need
Right.
to honor that, but we should not be engaging in a back and forth as a way to push learning at that point when things are so people are so emotional.
Yeah, and I think that's where a lot of the fear comes, right? What if a student feels this way and a student feels this way? And really grounding it in, we're just going to process what this, if anyone feels a certain way, if anyone's upset, and not get into the details of how everyone perceives what happened. I do think, though, there are some things that are really important when we're talking about anti-racism and being really clear and unequivocal, though, about what is okay and what's not okay, and what is harmful and what is not harmful. So it also, if we know a racist action has just happened, we also have to be very clear in saying we don't tolerate this here. And we're not going to have a debate about why it was okay or why it was warranted or spend all of our energy supporting the one who actually was the who created the harm, right? So we also have to be very clear on, social justice and human rights, and say, here in this room, in this school, in this space, we don't tolerate that language or any disagreement about whether this was right or wrong. And that's a place that I think also teachers and educators have to be very comfortable with, to not get sucked into someone saying, well, what if, and I heard, and it's like, nope, that's not a part of this conversation, because here we treat each other with dignity. And what we're talking about here, people were harmed. And that's what we're going to focus on. How do we start to repair the harm together?
So, Kathy, you're a you're a leader, and racial crisis has happened. Racial incidents happened in your school or nationally. What's the one thing that you should be keeping in mind?
I think just keeping in mind the pulse, right? So I think you mentioned making sure checking in with the educators, with the adults, provide them a space to process. So we're not just saying, hey, go out and deal with it. They're also in this. So let's just do a check in. What do we need? Do we need a space to process? Do you need some guidance? But then also with the directive that the expectation is you're going to do this work. You're going to acknowledge this happened because we have students here. We need to acknowledge all students in this. And again, give them the option to participate. So I think I would just start with pulling in your leaders, pulling in your adults, saying, are you okay? What do you need to be ready to go now and support our school community?
Great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.